Welcome, colleagues and friends of the Child Rights Coalition, Asia, and to all advocates of child rights, especially those from other CSOs and even friends from government. I understand we have a representative from the Department of Education who is with us this afternoon, and we are very honored to have you here. The president of the UN Economic and Social Council announced that for next year, there will be 45 countries that will present their voluntary national reviews, or what is known as the VNRs. And some of these countries come from our part of the region. From Asia are Pakistan, Philippines, Tuvalu, and Sri Lanka. Apart from that, there will also be what is called in-depth review of 5 interrelated SDGs. What are these SDGs? There will be one on SDG 4, quality education for next year, SDG 5, gender equality, 14, life below water, 15, life on land, and 17, partnership for the goals. Now, as we know, all of these SDGs are interlinked. And across all of these SDGs, there is a child rights dimension that we would like to emphasize, to underscore, and to enhance. As the pandemic that we are currently in the midst of has laid bare and exacerbated existing and deep social and economic inequalities that has affected everyone, including children. The voluntary national review process for next year is an opportunity to highlight and mainstream children's rights across the SDGs and in various national development platforms. Looking at children's rights in this manner is beneficial because it will help strengthen the child rights movement, especially during these times when confronted by a pandemic which has catalyzed multiple crises, a health crisis, as well as a jobs and an economic crisis. This is also taking place at a time when, in many contexts, we are witness to shrinking political as well as fiscal space. No? And human rights are being violated in many other contexts as well. And this will have a huge impact on the situation of children. We recognize the crucial role of children, therefore, as active citizens who should have a voice and have a place in the table, and children's organizations should be in the room where decisions are made. This is what participatory democracy is. This is what child rights governance is about. So children as active citizens with full rights are indeed our partners in forging solutions. Today, we are here to listen to how the VNR process will be an opportunity that we must grab in order to promote, protect, and inspire with stories of children, for children, by children. Child Rights Coalition Asia, in partnership with Social Watch Philippines and with support from Plan International, Asia Pacific Regional Hub, and Save the Children Philippines, has organized this learning session to equip our members and partners in engaging the voluntary national review on the progress of the implementation of the SDGs, particularly how do we use this platform so that children's rights are further promoted. So what are the objectives of this afternoon's session? Basically, there are 2 main objectives. The first is to deepen the understanding of child rights organizations on the SDG framework and monitor the progress of its implementation. And the second is to build the capacity of child rights organizations in utilizing the space for civil society and child participation in monitoring SDGs through the VNR process. As we know, it is one thing to say that children's rights are important. we know that priorities are best expressed when we're able to put resources and monies where our rhetoric is. So part of what we are promoting is ensuring financing, budgeting for children's rights. Finally, it is absolutely critical that we are able to keep the child rights agenda in the mindsets of policymakers, in the mindsets of the public, in the mindsets of communities, and in a manner in which the children are partners and leaders of this process. In this context, CSOs have an important role to play because there is a need to tip the balance, if you like, the balance of power, so that not just the rhetoric, the language of government tips in favor of children's rights, but resources are also tipped in favor of children's rights, so that programs and policies and resources are all aligned for the full realization of the rights of children, as well as young people. So with that, I would like to now call our first speaker. Our next speaker actually has sent a video message. She is the special representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children. And she made an effort to send a video message to all the participants this afternoon. Her mandate has been advocating for meaningful child participation in the VNR process. And she has been supporting member states to prepare for their VNR in terms of highlighting how the SDGs can be used as a platform for ending violence against children. Our next speaker is a medical doctor in pediatrics. In the last 3 decades, she has devoted her life to the promotion and protection of children's rights. She has vast experience in the development of national policies on the protection of the child and has worked with several governments, NGOs, and intergovernmental bodies. She has also joined the academe as lecturer in Moroccan and international universities. Friends, let us welcome Dr. Najad Maalia Majid.
Dear friends, dear colleagues, it is a pleasure to join you today and to contribute to this important and timely discussion. The VNR review process is a key opportunity to identify ways to accelerate the Sustainable Development Agenda and children's rights while building back better. Currently, 43 member states, including several from Asia, Pakistan, Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Tuvalu, have expressed their intent to present their VNR at the 2022 High-Level Political Forum. As the VNR process for 2022 is underway, there is an opportunity for wider stakeholder engagement, including civil society organizations and children themselves. I have 4 main messages about civil society engagement and child participation in the SDGs implementation and VNR process. First, the VNR process is a key opportunity to mainstream children's rights, considering the integrated and interlinked nature of the SDGs that echo the indivisible and interdependent nature of children's rights. The 2030 Agenda provides a crucial framework to build an inclusive, just, enabling, healthy, and safe environment and the full realization of children's rights as enshrined in the CRC. All 17 SDGs touch children's lives in one way or another. Therefore, the review process needs to be based on an integrated and child rights approach by identifying the links, intersections, and cross-cutting elements among the SDGs. All of the 5 SDGs to be reviewed at the 2022 High-Level Political Forum impact children's lives and rights. SDG 4 addresses access to inclusive, quality, and safe education, including through education for sustainable development, human rights, culture of peace and nonviolence, and citizenship. SDG 5 addresses ending all forms of discrimination and all forms of violence and exploitation, including child marriage, FGM, trafficking, and sexual abuse of girls. SDGs 14, Life Below Water, and 15, Life on Land, address how the development and degradation of the planet impact the environment in which a child grows up, affecting mainly the poorest and marginalized children. And SDG 17 addresses multilateralism, cooperation, global partnerships, as well as the digital divide. Second message, the VNR process is a key opportunity to stress the crucial role of children as agents of change and part of solution. VNR process is an important opportunity to ensure ethical, inclusive, and meaningful child participation in the 2030 agenda and in VNR processes. This is an opportunity to engage children and young people as the current and future generation of agents of change for a healthy, safe, just, inclusive, and resilient world, and to hold decision makers accountable. Third message, VNRs should emphasize how building back better after COVID can accelerate SDG implementation. The Building Back Better phase must be seen as an opportunity to build a new social contract that is not only adult-centered but also child-centered. The Building Back Better phase must invest in children from early age, as it is a sound investment for a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery. Fourth message, VNR processes are a key opportunity to mobilize and involve all key stakeholders, including civil society organizations and children. A wide process of mobilizing and bringing together government, civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, private sector, UN system, donors, financial institutions, and academia at the national, regional, and global levels is needed to accelerate recovery and implementation of the SDGs. And sure, children must be an integral part of the solution and of this mobilization. Dear friends and civil society colleagues, I turn to you to help keep governments accountable to achieve the 2030 agenda. There are only 8 years left. My mandate issued a practical guide on how to highlight issues around violence against children in VNRs, as well as an analytical review of the VNRs presented in 2020. The analytical review of 2021 VNRs will be shared soon. Our analytical review has shown that many governments are actively involving civil society organizations in the preparation of the VNRs. We are also seeing an increasing number of examples where children are actively involved in this process, including being part of the official delegation to the high-level political forum. As the governments advance their preparation for the VNR for 2022, there is an opportunity for civil society to be an active part of the process. In pursuing this opportunity, I emphasize the importance of collective action involving child rights, development, and humanitarian civil society organizations, as well as children and young people, because partnership is the only path to success. My mandate stands ready to work with you and all of other key stakeholders to keep our promise by 2030. I wish you a fruitful discussion today. Thank you.
So fantastic, no? That's a wonderful way to end her Dr. Najad's input with partnership is the only path to success. Let's leave it there. And now I would like to call on our next speaker. Dr. Thomas Mueller has 20 years of experience in the field of child protection, child rights advocacy, and management in government and non-government organizations. He currently serves as Deputy Executive Director at ECPAT International, the leading global civil society network focused on ending child sexual exploitation. Previously, Thomas held various management and leadership positions with Child Helpline International and worked with German government cooperation as senior advisor, child protection in East Asia. Friends, he is here with us this afternoon. Welcome, Thomas. You have the floor.
It's great to have this opportunity. It's also fantastic to see really Najat, making time to provide a video message. She's a very, very busy person, obviously. She's really the highest ranking advocate within the UN system on our issues, on violence against children. And so it's great to see her being committed to CRC Asia, but also to the VNR processes and to civil society involvement, of course, also children's involvement in the VNR processes. So fantastic that she shared these opening remarks. Really, what I'm trying to do now in 20 minutes is to get a quick recap, maybe for all of us, on what the VNR process actually is, and then discuss a few options on how we can participate, and maybe as civil society organizations, and also participate smartly. I think it's important that we are a bit strategic in the sense we are engaging in these processes, because there's many processes that we can use and follow up with governments on different areas of our work, and we need to see that these come together somehow. And I think that's what I try to spend a little bit of time on. And then I will spend a little bit less time on child participation, not because it's not equally important, but I don't think I'm the greatest expert at it. I have a little bit of information that I would like to share, and I will refer back to also Najat's office in this regard, because she is a great champion in that respect, and share a number of resources. But that's what I'm trying to do. So you already mentioned I work for ECAD International. I just spent 10 seconds on who we are. We are a global civil society network organization, 122 members in 104 countries currently. We were founded in 1990. And at that time, ECPAT stood for End Child Prostitution in Asian Tourism. So the acronym really referred to Asia. It then moved on to stand for End Child Prostitution and Trafficking. And now we have given up to find a way of explaining ECPAT other than that it stands for Ending the Sexual Exploitation of Children. And that is really what brings these different organizations, because they're really quite different around the world. There's not one organization the same like the other, but what unites them is the joint vision of ending the sexual exploitation of children. And every one of those organizations contributes to this vision in their own way. There might be advocacy organizations, there might be research organizations, there might be survivor-led organizations, there might be direct service providers. But like I said, somewhere in their work, they're really focusing on ending the sexual exploitation of children. That is the red thread through our network. And I also want to mention just very quickly the CSO Forum to End Violence Against Children, because ECPAT is a member of the CSO Forum, like some other organizations that are involved in this meeting. I know Save the Children is a member of the CSO Forum Plan, but also other regional international organizations, the African Child Policy Forum, Arigato, Child Helpline International, World Vision, many others. And we are working with the End Violence Partnership and trying to organize CSO participation and coordination in our joint effort to work toward ending violence against children. And we have done these kind of events on VNR processes and CSO participation a couple of times. And in that respect, I've used also some of their resources. So if you're interested, I put the link into the slides. Just go to the website of the End Violence Partnership and see what more is there to find about the CSO Forum. Well, so what is the VNR process? VNR stands for Voluntary National Review. And it's a voluntary process, as the name says. through which countries are encouraged to be regularly reviewed on their progress towards achieving the SDGs, right? Countries can, so there's not a great deal of guidance on how countries should be participating, on how they should be reporting. It's really for countries to make up their own mind whether or not they want to report, how often they want to report, what they want to report upon, and which goals and targets. And every country, as we see now over the period of the first 6 years of reporting, is really finding their own ways on how to do it. There's just I think a common way that the country needs to engage with the president of ECOSOC and say, like, this year we would like to contribute a VNR report, and then a process starts that is led by the government itself. And having said that, member states can engage every year, and we would like to see that, obviously, right? So if governments come forward and really engage in the process, commit to making progress towards the SDGs, then they actually have a story to tell, and they can come forward every year and participate every year. And we can see also, I don't have the ranking with me, but I see some countries reporting more than others. And yeah, so it's I think also already one task for civil society in the country to push our governments to participate and really follow up with them and ask them about their plans and see whether or not they preparing a report or not. So I guess in the sense that there's a lack of guidance, it's also an opportunity for us to contribute to the process and follow up and yeah, I guess also add value to the government. It's not only calling them out, but you know, if we find, for example, that they don't have a lot of information that they're sharing on violence against children, we might offer them some, because all of us have very much a lot of information. It's our daily work to deal with violence against children. All of us have a lot of resources, and some of those might come in handy for the government. And so they might consider making reference to violence against children if they have something in hand that we could probably give them. Now, what are the lessons learned so far from the VNRs that we have seen over the years since 2016? So most of the VNRs do not focus on all 17 SDGs and the theme of leaving no one behind, right? That leaving no one behind should really be reflected in reporting, but we don't see that. In our context, it's definitely children, the most vulnerable. How do they participate? How they engage in these processes? Yeah, we don't see a lot of those VNR processes on inclusion of those groups. Also, few countries have properly included non-state actors in their reporting. So while most members state they have simply noted the commitment to involvement of civil society, and it certainly reads well as a principle, but in a really strategic and coherent fashion, we see very little in terms of bringing civil societies on board and involving them. Occasionally you see pictures of a national consultation or something like that, but yeah, so those are few moments and few occasions that we see, but it's not really a best practice that is followed through by all the countries, and especially not in a sustainable way, so that you know, it's not part of the thought process from the very beginning. How do we develop involve civil society organizations? And then yeah, there's little, I think Najat mentioned it, those goals and targets are interlinked, and really it's important to understand, and I think it's important for us to make our governments understand, if they don't understand it or have understood it by now, they're interlinked in a way that if you fail to, if you focus on one certain area, and it's maybe the economy, and that's where you put your efforts in SDG implementation, but you ignore climate change, then yeah, your outcomes on economy will not be very great, because those things are interlinked. And really, So it's important for governments, if they really want to make this a tool that works for them to help improve and make progress, to see how they are interlinked, to see you know, what's the impact if they ignore one or the other target or goal on those that they actually want to present as having made progress. So it's because what we see is that it's often a pick and choose menu. Governments go through the 17 goals and all those 169 targets, or however many targets we have, and pick and choose where they think they're comfortable to report, right? So we're seeing, for example, that in our area of work, that there's a lot of reference to trafficking, because every year there is there's the TIP report published by the US Department of State, and there's usually a lot of mechanisms already in place with governments to actually collect data in regards to trafficking. And so they're comfortable that they have some data there. And so there's some reference in the VNR reporting on trafficking, but they don't touch so much, for example, violence prevalence, right? Because it's not such hard data, but also because it might show a picture that is not very, it doesn't put the country in the best light, obviously. And so countries pick and choose, and they say, okay, we have a story to tell here and story to tell there and so on, but they forget how these things need to be interlinked, and we hardly see those interlinkages respected and reflected in the VNR reports. And also interlinkages not only amongst SDGs, but with other human rights mechanisms. And I think I referred to this just a moment ago also, that we need to be smart on how to engage, right? So if we ask a country something in a CRC shadow report or in a UPR exercise or in a CDAW report, then we should probably use the VNR process in a way that we ask them the same things. So we're adding more moments of monitoring into our journey with the governments, and we can have more moments where we can follow up on basically the same or similar asks, right? And then it becomes much more strategic in the way we engage. And yeah, looking at 16 and especially 16.2, which is the golden target for us, end all violence and exploitation of children, there's very few countries who report on it, right? And those who report on SDG 16 hardly say a word about violence against children, 16.2, which is disappointing. And then I think we are really at a crucial point in time. We have now 8 years left, I think, until 8.5 until 2030. And then, you know, those should have been achieved, or at least make significant progress. And so now we need to see how we can, you know, liaise and create synergies and really push and pull at the same end of the rope, so that 16.2 gets a little bit more attention in the VNR reporting going forward. Now, I've just picked out the 2019 VNR report of the Philippines, and violence was mentioned. So I link to the report in the slide. So if you can, later on, if you want to have a read, you just click through to the report. So violence was mentioned 6 times, 1 under goal 8, 6 times under goal 16. Violence in the context of disaster was mentioned, all forms of violence and related death rates. I think that's also something that, obviously, death rates are numbers and statistics that governments have. Violence and number of homicides, violence and terrorism, children in the context of birth rates, UNICEF funding, children consultation was mentioned there, malnutrition, education, disability, no word about violence against children, right? And so, yeah, here we are. We really celebrated 16.2 a lot and pushed for many years before 2015 to get 16.2 into this framework. And so now there's very little uptake. I should say that's not unique to the Philippines. I just picked that one out because, the meeting is organized out of the Philippines, but also because it's an Asian meeting, and also, and I should say on the positive side, at least we see in the Philippines, they're quite regular in reporting. They've also already lined up for the next round of reporting, 2022. They said they submit a report, so there's at least commitment to the process as such. Now, I'm just inviting everyone, if you want to make a start on voluntary national reviews and really understand the process better, there's a fairly good website. I put the link there in the top also, where you can click through the website of the High-Level Political Forum. And when you go to that link, then you see where it's highlighted in red, there's a link that you can click and it leads you to the Voluntary National Review Database, right? And there's a lot of information about HLPF, about the High-Level Political Forum, but in particular, when you click through, then it takes you to a page where you see the different countries on the left-hand side here. And you can click 2016, and then it presents you all the countries that have submitted a VNR report in 2016. And you can go through the countries, and I've clicked here on 2022, and those countries so far, 46 countries have committed to submit a report to the 2022 High-Level Political Forum, right? And so again, I clicked, I added the link here for everyone for ease of reference. And I encourage you to go there, see if your government is planning to put a report in. If not, yeah, well, then the first thing would be maybe engage with them and say, why are you not doing that? If there's a way of engaging with the government. So if they're not reporting, we need to push them to like, why are you not doing this? Are you not taking this seriously? Why? What is going on, right? Is there nothing to report? Now, if you click on your country, if you scroll through, you find your country and you click on your country, and I've just picked out Pakistan because Pakistan, I know it's on the agenda later also, but also because it's one out of two very few Asian countries that have submitted for the next 2022 HLPF round to submit a report. So then every country has a page like this, and you can click through and see who is there as a starter, right? Who is the focal point in our country? Who is in charge of facilitating the development of the voluntary national review? And yeah, so you have a contact here, you have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you have an email address there, and you can directly get in contact and say, all right, what are you planning? What are your plans of involving civil society? You try to find some information. Then maybe if your agenda is on violence against children, then it's not going to be Foreign Affairs who is working on this, but they might refer you further within the government, maybe to the National Commission for Child Welfare, something like that, who will be in charge of delivering some information to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the production of this report. And then you get a new contact, and gradually you work your way into the system. Maybe the National Commission then says, oh, we're working on a national consultation together with UNICEF, so maybe you can get in there, right? So it's a little bit of stabbing in the dark and finding out what's in the making, what's in the plans, but it's a very straightforward process, at least because you have contact points and you can get some information about the process. I'd also recommend you engage with like-minded agencies, with other, I mentioned UNICEF, engage with other child rights organizations, child protection organizations, find out, has anyone any plans? Is there already something going on for a coordinated CSO input into the process? Yeah, then you don't have to lift it yourself entirely, right? Then you can actually maybe piggyback on an effort that's already going on, and you just contribute what you want to contribute to this process. So, you know, there are definitely a few things every one of us can do, and then find out what can be done. I mean, it's really because there's so little guidance and there's no standard process for countries. It's really for us to be proactive and find out what's going on, right? And how we can be part of this. Yeah. So, and then once you're in there, you can also check when was the last time my country has submitted a report. And you go, all right, they've submitted a report at 2019. You click on HLPF 2019 and you find key messages document here. You find the entire VNR report that the country submitted. You find, like some key messages, you find some presentations, you at least find the documents that you can hold your government to account for. You can, maybe there was a reference made to our topics, then you can follow up in your submission now, or whatever you're planning to participate to those commitments or those reporting areas that they have mentioned. If your topics are not mentioned, then you can call them out on that topic, I think. And say, why is violence against children not mentioned, right? But certainly that's a first step also of being strategic, not just kind of throwing something in there, but finding out what happened before, what was mentioned before. And I think, like I said, in that respect, this website is really helpful. Now, how to be even smarter about this, and that's really why it interlinks with other human rights mechanisms. How to get this right. I think I'm a really big fan of the Danish Institute for Human Rights. I think they have a fantastic website. There's so many resources for us that we can tap into, and see how we can, how can we be better and more proactive in using those interlinkages. So this particular site, and the link again leads you to that particular site, provides information about how the SDG goals and targets interlink with other human rights mechanisms, right? And every one of those targets that are underneath every goal are with a link, and you can click on that, and then it provides you with a lot of information about how that particular target engages with other human rights reporting mechanisms. So if you click here on 16.2, then it would lead you to that site, and it gives you goal 16 description, the target description, and then the exact instruments where you say like, okay, in others, how does this 16.2, how is it reflected in the CDAW? How is it reflected in CRC? You know, and this is just the top part of that page, right? You can scroll down, there's many more mechanisms and other conventions that you can phrase and name and make the argument stronger that your government needs to do something with this, because they're also signatory to an ILO convention, or because they're signatory to the CRC and an optional protocol, whatever your message is. But that's what I mean in terms of not bringing an entirely new problem now to the government, but saying like, you've already committed to it. There's various processes where you're reminded to it, where you followed up, where you have to report back to a human rights mechanism, and you can list them, and then go for the same ask in the VNR report and say like, listen, you know, we would like you to refer and respond to these topics. Now, I put this table here just to see, you know, so some of our topics and how they interlink, just to make this a little bit more visible. So you have target 5.3 and 8.7 that refer to child marriage, and you have article 16.2 in CEDAW, article 24.3 in the CRC. FGM, sexual abuse and violence, child trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation, decent work, and so on. And whatever your topics within the violence agenda, I would kind of invite you then to hook yourself into one of those and draw these cross references, because that's really how you make your argument stronger. There's again, from the Danish Institute for Human Rights, there's an overview that shows the SDG targets that link to the highest number of UPR recommendations, right? So your country is assessed through the UPR process, and here is the top whatever 10 of topics that link from within the SDG targets that link to the highest number of UPR recommendations. And we see that end violence against and exploitation of women is very high on the agenda, end modern slavery, ensure equal opportunities. There's a lot of interlinkages with UPR recommendations. And so all these resources are there. It's really kind of, how do we make use of it, right? I'm saying all that because I'm thinking that one can make a lot of effort, and certainly participating in a process like the VNR can be very resource heavy, time intensive, requires some capacity. So we want to make the strongest and best and most strategic contribution to this process, and so that make it less likely that the government actually ignores it. And so if you're working on modern slavery, then you think that, okay, I'm making an argument now in the VNR report. I might just check the UPR report, outcome report from the last UPR session of my country and say, maybe there's something in there that I can work with, right? And yeah, similar. I leave you with that. The links are in there. In the interest of time, I move on, but I'm just inviting you to and in general, go to the website of the Danish Institute for Human Rights, because there's a lot more, right? There's a lot of information that is really well put together and very useful. Now, the last thing is child participation. And the picture you see there and the report that I'm linking there is also produced by Najat's office that you heard speaking before. I think that obviously I think we're preaching to the converted in that sense because we're child rights organizations. But really we're looking for a new era of meaningful child engagement. So the times are over where we have an event, even if it's coming from a good place and we want to push forward the child protection agenda, and we organize an event and then we get the kids in and they have a little dance and we send them off again, and then the adults are talking again. So that's not what we're meaning. And we really need to lead. We really need to lead the way on how we engage kids meaningfully, right? How do we make them real partners and key players in this process? And there are certain ways on how to do it, and there are certain ways on how not to do it. And this report really has a lot of information. It maps on how children are taking part in today's world. And you know, there's 245 case studies from 86 countries, so it's a rich resource. It shows how children are collaborating with adults and with decision makers. It shows also the challenges and the disruptions we saw in those engagements due to COVID, because some of the things that have been started, that have been established, then you know, had to end due to COVID or couldn't continue. And so that's all in this report. It shows to good practices, especially there's a few mentions about the VNR and HLPF report processes, and from the 2020 processes, and see how children engage there. There's a reference to a number of consultations and meetings and surveys where the views of children have been collected and then fed into these processes, but also some examples of a more permanent and systemic engagement of children. I think that's really where you know, it gets more complex, but also where it gets much more interesting, because instead of just collecting one snapshot, having one survey, or having a side event at HLPF and have a bunch of good youth representatives there that can tell a compelling story, I think it's more interesting to really find ways on how your daily work can be influenced and guided by children's voices. Yeah, that's for us to figure out how that can work. Here in this report, there's a number of resources, a number of links and recommendations. I invite you to have a look at that report and see if there's anything in there for you. And then obviously we have a number of really great child participation experts on the call. Maybe there's a good discussion coming together on that topic. Well, that's it for me for the moment. I'd be happy to answer any more questions that you have or participate in the discussion. And yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Thomas, for giving us a substantive overview of what the VNR is about, how we can use it to its maximum so that our child rights advocacies is promoted. And you also gave very important and useful resource materials that we could tap in the course of our work, as well as pointed out, which I thought was very useful. You came out with a matrix of interlinkages between the various conventions, and how they actually cross-validate and reinforce each other, and that was particularly useful. So thanks a lot for that, Thomas. There have been a couple of engaged questions that have come in, and so let me get going on that. Okay. So particularly for Thomas, from KK of PLSDF, please reiterate what the VNR process is. I'll just say the first three questions, and then maybe you can just, and then second, what is the ideal time for reporting? Related to this, should VNRs be conducted once a year? Who normally leads this process? Is it the government or non-government? And then a final question, if it's still all right, Thomas. Is there a country who has managed to have a VAC on their VNR reporting? Is there a good practice on this? Okay.
Yes, thank you. I mean, they're all good questions. Yeah, so in a nutshell, in addition to what I mentioned before, the VNR process is the monitoring process of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So all countries in 2015, all heads of states came together and agreed to those 17 goals, 169 targets, and said, we will do our best to work towards implementing all of those. And there's a whole bunch of really high ticket items there, closing the financial gap between countries, ending poverty, access to basic resources, climate, environment. I mean, everything seems to be, unfortunately, having much more priority than child protection, right? And but child protection has its own target, and we can work with that target. And countries need to, in regards to the second question, who is, or was it the third question, who is leading on that? Mm-hmm. It is a government-led process, right? So the country, the government needs to register their interest to submit a VNR report to the president of the ECOSOC, right? If they want to participate, then the country, officials from the country need to register their interest to participate with the president of ECOSOC, and then they get filed as a country that will participate in next year's voluntary national review process. I should say that I didn't mention anything about that. I think the voluntary national review reports will be presented to the high-level political forum, which is a UN mechanism consisting of country representatives, usually on ministerial level. They meet every year in June. They send ministers and ministries to the high-level political forum, and at that event, those voluntary national review reports from countries will be presented and discussed, right? And every 4 years, the high-level political forum will also meet on heads of state level, right? And in 2019, I think, so we had 2015 where all the heads of states came together. And then 2019 was the last time that all heads of states also came together. And as last thing in that context, every year, the high-level political forum chooses a number of SDG goals and targets that will have specific attention during the review process of that year. right? And so other than that, the country can choose what they want to report on, whether they want to report on those targets and goals that are getting special attention or not, or what are the goals and targets that the country wants to report on is entirely decided within the government of that country. Yeah, and yeah, there's no guidance or reference to how often a country should report. It's again down to the government to decide, and it's really, we hope obviously that they come forward every year and submit a report so that there's a constant monitoring going on. But we see everything from, yeah, some countries only submitted one VNR report since 2015, right? Others submitted 4. You know, so, and that information you can find on that website where I shared the link. And what's the ideal time for reporting? Yeah, so I guess it has to be before the high-level political forum meets. I think depending on the government, some processes started quite early in the game. So now for the 2022 VNR reporting process, it will take place in June 2022. Right now, with end of October, already 46 countries have committed to participate in the process. So we now need to go into the information of every country that is of our interest and see who is leading on the process from within the government, what is already going on. We have seen a lot of activity in the first quarter, though, of the next year always. So when you're through the new year and then you have 6 months left to go until the HLPF, that's when usually activities pick up in terms of consultations on national level. And but like I said, there's no one size fits all situation. It's really how the government organizes it. That might be, so don't rely on me saying like, oh, we only need to engage in Q1 of next year, because then maybe it's already done in your country. So it's for you to find out. I hope that answered some of the questions.
Right. There was one question, Thomas, is there a country who has managed to do a relatively decent job of promoting the VAC, the VAC issue in their VNR reporting?
Yeah, you have the usual, I think, champions in that regard. So it'd be interesting to read Sweden's report, for example. Those who have child protection higher on the agenda in general. It has been a step from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, where the MDGs really, the European countries, Canada, North America, Australia, they were not really interested in it. They thought like, it's not for us, right? And so now SDG is really inclusive and everyone is required to do better. And there's a role for every country to play. Those countries who are the usual champions of child protection, or those who are very friendly to the mandate of the special representative, right? There's usually a group of countries that support the mandate of the SRSG. And those countries obviously make an effort to mention and reflect these topics. We at ECPAD did a review between 2016 and 19 of all the reports that have been submitted by all governments, and just did a word check whether or not they mentioned the word sexual exploitation of children. And yeah, it was different from year to year, but I would think, yeah, I can see if I can share that overview with you. I don't have the exact numbers in mind, but overall, it was also disappointing. It is not a huge number of countries that really pick up on this issue either.
So it remains a continuing challenge.
Oh yeah,
to put VAC up front and center in voluntary national reviews. So that's a good thing that we need to remember moving forward. Last 2 questions, and we need to move rather quickly. The first question is, how can the information on VNR be utilized in policy making, policy decision making? And the second question is, what if a country is not reporting? What can we do? Okay.
So the first question was, how can we make sure that the VNR can be integrated in policy discussions and decisions? Well, I would use it just as the way we use it, or we use other human rights mechanisms, really. And we need to be serious about it, because the process is not dictated. There's so much freedom for the government to do whatever they want. So I think we need to be more serious about this process. We need to demand our government to take action. So it's also getting into the second question of what can we do if they don't. I don't think we have any, we can't make our governments do anything if they are hell-bent not to do anything, right? That's just the reality of it. But we can certainly remind them. We can remind them more or less publicly, depending on the country. I think you're the experts on how to advocate in your countries. I mean, I represent a global network of advocacy and campaigning organizations, and I know for a fact that advocacy and campaigning works different from country to country. And there's countries where you can really call out your government and you can name and shame them. And there's other countries where you have to be more subtle about it and have to, you know, and it really is for you to know best how to engage with your government. But the thing is that because there's not such a stringent process to it, it's also not so high on our own agendas, right? It's and really we need to pick this process up, and we need to engage and ask our government what they're doing, and then exert the pressure that we can exert as organizations in any given country to demand that the government takes action. So, like, you know, our heads of state was there and signed up to it as a priority, right? So we can make that argument. It's not we didn't sign up, it was our heads of state, right? And so there should be some commitment. One could publish if our country is very low in the ranking of having submitted report, one could publish that somewhere or mention that in an article. I know that governments are very, how they say, they're very interested in how they compare with their neighboring countries often, right? If you say, well, all our neighbors have submitted 4 reports and what is happening here, right? I mean, there's different ways of bringing this message, but that would mean that one way or another, we would have to put some kind of public or pressure or, I don't know, advocacy momentum to the process. And then once the government does submit something, and that's, I think, an equal thing or challenge we have with the other human rights mechanisms, is often we also as child rights organizations, we put a lot of effort in developing those reports when our country is under review, and then we forget it for 3 years until the country is up for review again. And we don't do a lot of work with those reports in those 3 years where actually something should be happening. Like 3 years later, the country is up for CRC review, and then we dig back and say, what did we say in 2017? Oh yeah, then we follow up. But then needs to be more effort. Those are just monitoring moments, right? The magic needs to happen in between, and really it's the same. So if the country does submit a report, we need to read those reports. We need to find if our topics are reflected. If they're not, we need to call it out. If they're reflected wrongly, we need to call it out. We need to use those. If we don't use it, no one's going to use it. That's just maybe in a nutshell what I have to say to that.
No, but that's fantastic. Thanks a lot, Thomas. As if you will look at the chat, your input has really sparked a lot of comments and a lot of appreciation on a lot of the points that you've raised. And so thank you so much for walking us through what the VNR is about, the complexity of what it's, of that process, and also helping us to better understand how to engage it. And, in the question and answer, really pointedly doing your best to grapple with some of the challenges on how to maximize VNR as a platform for our child rights advocacies. So thank you so much, Thomas,
thank you
for this
everyone.
Wonderful segment.
If you do share the slides, because I saw one question in the chat also for the list of countries, which ones have committed to submit a report and not. Those links are in the slides that I've shared. I sent them over and you can share it with everyone. And then I invite you to go to those links because you find all the information that some of those questions brought up in the chat right there. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. So Thomas gave us the big picture in terms of the VNR, right? What that looks like at the international level, and basically the broad specifications of how it works. Now we will talk about how the VNR works at a much more backyard level, how it operates at the national level and at the regional level with very specific, case studies. No? We have three speakers with us this afternoon. One will talk about the civil society organizations and coalitions, both in Southeast Asia and South Asia, and talk about their national and regional civil society engagement when they, engaging the VNR. So we will have a presentation from the Philippines and another one from Indonesia. And then after the two presentations on the VNR engagement at two countries, we will also have a young person who will later join us and share his and his peers' efforts in advocating for their rights in the 2021 high-level political forum, which they were part of at the global level. So now we will have, in a way, three testimonials of CSOs engaging the VNR, which we came across, given to us by Thomas, but seen in terms of how now it has been operationalized at the country level. So our first speaker, who will talk about engagement at the Philippine level, and also at the regional level, his name is Rene Raya. He is my colleague in Social Watch Philippines. He has had long experience and international exposure in social research, policy and budget analysis, and advocacy. He has special competencies in policy in quantitative analysis, poverty and social indicators monitoring. He worked on various projects implemented by Social Watch International, Asia and South Pacific Association for Basic and Adult Education, or ASPE, and development partners and UN agencies such as UNICEF and WHO. So this guy that I'm about to introduce, he's kind of like a numbers guy. He's one of those rare breeds who likes statistics, but has a very clear social development mindset. And that's very rare to find that combined in one person. He also worked on projects in the areas of MDG monitoring, education and literacy, public investment in children and budget advocacy. Currently, he sits on the board. He's a board member of Action for Economic Reforms. He's a co-convener of Social Watch Philippines and the lead policy analyst at the Asia South Pacific Association for Basic and Adult Association. With pride, I would like to introduce my colleague, Rene Raya.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Marivic, for that long and generous introduction. And also thank you to CRC Asia for giving us this opportunity to share our experiences and lessons in the VNR engagement processes. Okay, so CRC will share my slide. And if you can, okay, so I will be sharing experiences on the VNR and the spotlight reporting in the Philippines and at the regional level in Asia and the Pacific. So this will be a two-part presentation. Yes, in the next slide. So just a little something about Social Watch Philippines. It is a national network of over 100, previous slide, of over 100 organizations and networks across the country. It is, can you go to the first slide, please? Yeah, so it is engaged in MDG and now in the SDG monitoring, localization, and indicator system. It produces alternative reports, no? Before we call it shadow reports, but then we said, no, we're not always in the shadow. We should not be in the shadow, but we should be in the spotlight. And so we have these spotlight reports. This is one of our competence in financing for development, participatory public finance, and then in the alternative budget initiative. And one of our major programs is actually in public investment in children. Okay, in the next slide. Social Watch engages the SDG processes at national, regional, and global levels as well. So it engages the government of the Philippines in the VNR preparation. And we regularly comes out with alternative reports on the SDG. We call it the Spotlight Report, based on situation monitoring, our own monitoring and our own analysis, together with other civil society organizations. The Spotlight Reports is the result, no, of consultations that we have had, a series of consultation with other organizations and partners. Okay, so in the next slide, Philippines has participated twice already in the VNR review process that was presented in the high-level political forum. So in 2016, the first reporting ever, no, the Philippines actually was one of the first to volunteer to report. No, actually there was very little to report on because it's just 1 year. And then in 2019, which is a summit year, a very important year, as mentioned by Thomas earlier, no, we had the Philippines had the second VNR, and education was one of the goals that was reviewed, no. And then in 2022, we will be having our third VNR. And I asked the state planning, an official from the NEDA, or our state planning body, and they said that, our commitment is to report every 3 years, no? So I don't know if that's a hard commitment coming from the country, from the government, but now there is already a commitment to do a report, a third report in 2022. No, so Social Watch with other civil society organizations prepared, no, its first ever SDG Spotlight Report. No, previously we had annual reports that engages and addresses the MDGs, but this time, this is the first time that we have this Spotlight Report on the SDG. And we called it Justice and Sustainability, which is an alternative 2030 agenda for development from the civil society perspective, from the perspective of the marginalized and disadvantaged. And we have contributors from civil society, among them Save the Children, organizations from the persons with disabilities, education, NGO clusters, and environment networks. No? And then we presented our Spotlight Report in a dialogue with the Philippine government and the UNDP, no? So NEDA and the UNDP in a dialogue, we discussed the content and our recommended agenda for 2030. Okay, next slide. So, in 2019, we had the second VNR in the Philippines, and education, as mentioned, is one of the goals that was reviewed. And Social Watch engaged NEDA this time because during the first VNR report of the Philippines, it was too late. No, they came up with the report just minutes. I mean, a few days before the actual presentation in the high-level political forum. There was a turnover of government. They were new, and so there was really no time for consultation. But this time around, there was an opportunity better than the previous VNR. So Social Watch engaged NEDA and our Parliament, Congress, on these VNR processes. And we launched our second Spotlight Report with substantial contribution from civil society in a series of consultation. and this we call closing gaps and overcoming policy incoherence. Now, INET, which is the education focus organization member of Social Watch, also came up and was one of the more active participants in this spotlight and VNR processes. Well, fortunately, the education sector was quite active also. The Philippine Education Ministry or Department was active in following through the commitments that were made. And there is actually a committee called the SDG Forum Multi-Stakeholders Committee, which convened a series of forum and dialogue with civil society. And through that, Social Watch, ENET, Save the Children, and other CSOs were able to recommend or put across the messages that they want to see in the VNR. But having said that, no, also ENET and other civil society organizations contributed to coming up with their spotlight report, specifically focusing on education. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is one of the forums that we convened in order to consult different sectors. I think there were a number child rights organization, focus organizations such as CRC, Coalition in Asia, I think Plan International, World Vision, Save the Children, of course, participated in this consultation series. Next slide. Yeah, okay. So just to run you through the content, because these are the goals that were reviewed. So there is a special chapter right up on SDG 4, on education, 8 and 10, and then SDG 13 on climate action, and then on 17 on partnership. But also we had special features in this spotlight on strengthening commitment to end violence against children, indigenous peoples, and the sustainable development goals, and also tobacco control, a leverage to attain SDGs in the Philippines. Yeah, moving forward. Next slide. Yeah, so taking a look at the contribution from Save the Children related to justice for children, yeah, it was emphasized the need for children to have a better, a voice in the VNR processes, to strengthen the implementation of policies. We have very good policies. However, there is a gap, a big gap between policy and its implementation. And we recognize the need to raise resources for child protection. Next slide. Okay, so I think this has been already shared by Dr. Nadia on the importance of civil society participation in the VNR process, coming up with our own reports and analysis. So the Spotlight Report is a standalone or an alternative to the official government report. It brings the voices of the marginalized, of civil society, in its assessment of what is the progress of the SDG implementation in the respective countries, and what can be done better to accelerate progress in the SDGs. Spotlight is not the Spotlight Report is not limited to countries that are being reviewed. And so we make it a point that whoever would be ready to come up with their reports related to SDG implementation, then please do so. So we're not limited to, if your country is being reviewed, then come up with a parallel report. No. So we can do it every year if we can. Okay, next slide. So probably child rights organization across Asia, even if it's 16 may not be reviewed, but there are other SDG goals and targets where, child rights are very much indicated. So Social Watch is a member of Social Watch International, founded in 1996, and it comes out with annual reports with contribution from country members. So Spotlight reports in 2019, 2020, and latest is the 2021. Next slide. Okay, just to And in between these spotlight reports which Social Watch Philippines produces, it also comes up with specific contribution to the global report on the SDG Watch, SDG monitoring. So even if we don't have a full report, then we contribute to this global spotlight report. Next slide. Okay, so that's the engagement at the national level. Now, I will be sharing the experience of ASBE, the education focus network in the region related to their SDG and VNR engagement at regional and global levels. Next slide. Okay. So just to tell a little something about ASBE, it is a regional network of over 200 organizations in 30 countries across Asia and the Pacific. And ASBE and its coalition members, INET is a member of ASBE, the INET in the Philippines, and it has been active in the Education for All, which is part of the MDG, advocacy, and also it has ASBE and coalitions have successfully advocated for a comprehensive education agenda as part of the SDG 2030. So since 2015, ASBE and coalitions have actively engaged in the SDG processes at national, regional, and global level. Coming up with spotlight reports, as the civil society alternative review of SDG on education, SDG 4. Next slide. Okay, this has been shared by Dr. Nadia earlier. Why do you engage in the VNR? There's a lot of effort, and time related to engaging in these processes, VNR and HLPF, but it is a good way, a good opportunity and space for civil society to be able to hold government to account, provide its own analysis, and to be visible and amplify their respective advocacies at the national and regional level. So that is how we see the importance of engaging in the VNR and the high-level political forum. Next slide. Yeah, so just a roadmap to the high-level political forum. I mentioned already about the VNR processes that is happening at the country level, and we have regional processes as well. And in our region, UNESCAP is actually convening an annual meeting where inputs into the VNR and also the high-level political forum are actually compiled, discussed, and summarized as an outcome document that will be presented to the high-level political forum. Of course, there are also global thematic conferences related to education, maybe even to violence against children could be one of those thematic global conferences in preparation for the HLPF. Next slide. Okay, so in the HLPF, in the regional Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, this is how civil society participates. We have a civil society preparatory meetings to consolidate our analysis and also our recommendations. We organize delegations coming from the sector. And then we organize also side events, because this is one way by which we can have an agenda, clear agenda in a clear forum presented during this regional forum, and also volunteer to be panelists in all relevant side events and sessions during this forum. Next slide. Okay, so the HLPF have different segments. There is the preparatory sessions before the high-level meeting. There is a 3-day ministerial meeting, usually happening on the second week of the HLPF, where the VNR of countries are being presented. It's really just a 30-minute country presentation that includes already questions coming from the member states and also from civil society and other stakeholders. No? And civil society would have only 2 minutes to present, maybe 1 or 2 presenting from civil society as their intervention to the VNR of the respective country. Of course, side events are very useful, and this happens throughout the high-level political forum, which is a 10-day or sometimes 12 days. No, and these side events can be organized by governments, INGOs, UN, and civil society as well. And there are several reports that are presented during this high-level political forum for which civil society can engage and intervene. Next slide. Okay, just to run through. So in the HLPF, we organize side events related to the issues that we want to profile, related to education, related to work, decent work, as well as inequality issues. And this is one way by which we can also maximize this event for our advocacies. Next slide. And we also take that opportunity to launch civil society spotlight reports in our side events or in the side events organized by other organizations and even governments. Next slide. And it is very important also to make interventions in official sessions or even in side events. And there is space, but there's a lot of work, a lot of, accreditation processes for you to make interventions in official sessions at the high-level political forum. Okay, but it's possible to do that even during this pandemic period where HLPF is done virtually. Next slide. And yes, the final outcome document of HLPF is a ministerial declaration. The zero draft comes out around May or early June, and there's space for intervention through online commenting. And in our experience, we are able to include some of our key advocacies which have not been mentioned in this ministerial declaration. And so this is one way also by which, violence against children can be profiled and highlighted in this declaration. Next slide. Okay, so this advocacy and campaign does not end during this VNR and HLPF engagement, but it is a continuing SDG campaign. Next slide. So we make use of our spotlight reports, our results of our engagement at national, regional, and global levels to bring these messages across in different regional and global events and forums, as well as in national forums and campaigns as well. Next slide. And the lessons, just to run through some of the important lessons. First, the APFSD and the high-level political forum is a marketplace. And so we have to get organized to maximize those platforms for our profiling of our advocacies, and we have to make sure that we are able to, next slide, maximize the different opportunities that are open for our engagement. There are protocols, processes, negotiations, and horse trading that we should be aware of so that we don't get lost, because it's really a marketplace. Even in this virtual space, you can see a lot of actions and activities going on and a lot of accreditation processes. So it is important also in getting delegation representatives from government, ambassadors, ministers, to be included in the side events that you might be organizing, and also to submit online comments. There are different reports which are open for public comment. Okay, next slide. I think this is the last slide. Our lesson also is to engage throughout the entire VNR process, because it's very limited if you just confine to one segment, to one arena or one platform. And then we, as mentioned by Thomas earlier, broaden our linkages in our key advocacies, link it to the other SDGs, maximize all options for engagement, and then give visibility to people behind the statistics, the children, the marginalized and disadvantaged groups. And we need to propose concrete, actionable recommendations. We don't stop simply at presenting analysis. And then it's good to document the process, outcomes, and our advocacy reach. Next slide. So thank you, everyone. Over to you, Marie.
Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rene, for that very comprehensive sharing of the VNR experience by Social Watch Philippines and ASBAY to give us an idea of what it's like to do that at both national and regional level. I would like to invite now another colleague, this time from Indonesia, to also speak to this type of engagement. His name is Junito Diaz, who is an advocacy and external manager at Wahana Vizi, Indonesia. Diaz has put in a lot of work to ensure community participation in the process of policy making. He believes social accountability is the engine of sustainable development. Before joining Wahana Vizi, Indonesia, Dria worked as a journalist and was actively assigned for media and democratization. Can I now invite Junito Diaz to please share with us your important insights?
Thank you very much. I think many of you already understand about the mechanism of VNR in our each countries in Asia Pacific. So what I would like to share right now is more on how the lesson learning, how we in Indonesia try to mainstream the child participation. As you know, Indonesia is one of the pathfinding countries. So it should be, we have a lot of policy that support the process of VNR. But actually it's not, I don't know why, but VNR for in Indonesia, it's more like a report contain our achievement in SDGs targets. So like each year, we made a contribution for VNR report. Of course, in the child focus rights perspective, but it is more focused on what we achieved so far. We did make some recommendation, and as Thomas already mentioned, there is no link between UPR and other document with VNR. So Wahana Vizi Indonesia is actually already 3 times contributing to VNR, but I think I have to highlight this. Wahana Vizi Indonesia never contribute as a single organization. So we came always as a coalition. I think this is important because the achievement in the SDGs target is not solely one organization. I saw my colleague here, I think Budiana from Sejiwa as an example, is really active in the field of sexual violence against children in the context of online platform. So each organization in Indonesia contribute in VNR. So it is, I think, it's better if we came as a coalition because we can arrange ourselves to contribute its SDGs. In 2017, Wahana Vizi Indonesia contribute in Goal 3 via what we call Warm Mother and Child Health Movement. In 2019, with EVAC Alliance, we contribute in Goal 16, and in 2021, again, Goal 16, contribute via EVAC Alliance. Next slide. I think what we can learn as a contributor in the VNR writing is, the first one, I already talked about the coalition. The second one is the evidence-based advocacy. Wahana Vision Nation, also other organizations, made some research and published the research, and this would be performed as evidence-based for the VNR, because as we know, they need some, let's say, an evidence base that we already achieved the SDG target. I'm sorry, and other thing is that we can contribute is the best practices. As I said before, my colleagues like Ibu Diana, she contribute best practice in the field of online platforms. Social, I'm sorry, my voice. Contribute in the sexual violence in the online platform. I think Sejua also contribute one of the best practices. And what also important for us is drafting recommendation, because as example in Indonesia in 2017, the VNR was writing by the government, and the CSO contribute the stories. In 2019, the writing, VNR writing is by a consultant, but like 70% stories contributed by the organization. But in 2021, what's interesting in Indonesia is the writing is by the consultant, but it's a bit different because the consultant is also CSOs. So it's a bit different because in 2017 and 2019, VNR was writing by the, let's say, the independent consultant, but the identity consultant is not as a CSO. So it's a bit different in 2021. But I think most interesting is child participation. I think our strive is to put to mainstream child participation in the VNR process. Then it is difficult, I have to admit it, because we already started in 2017 with the coalition with Women and Children Health movement. We try to, to have some child consultation on the VNR process. But it is still limited to child consultation. I mean, we ask children, is this report is already enough for the children, and should we contribute more and then and so on and so on. In 2019, the child participation is not still not as a mainstream for VNR writing. So what we did is we create child participation in Effect Alliance. And the children, we consult the children, the SDGs part, and what they think we can contribute on that, the achievement. And they can also give the opinion on the achievement itself. But in 2019, we made a letter to the government and asked the government to really seriously think to mainstream the child participation, because we have a policy that mandate the government to do the child participation. So it is important to, to mainstream the process into the child participation mechanism. So in 2021, our National Development Agency held child participation. I think this is something that we can applaud there, because this is some achievement actually, child participation in the VNR process. So they, in 2 days, they not just consult, but also try to build, to develop writing from the children. So I think this is interesting, but I mean, if we are looking at the back, we can see this is a process. We cannot just suddenly to have child participation, but this is process from 2017. But still, the government in 2021, if we should have some, we should have a meaningful child participation, but we still, it's not the best because the government held the event on the school time. So most of the children is difficult to join because they have, they have to go to school. So that's why we already, appreciate the government movement to mainstream the child participation, but it is not the best yet. So we hope in the next VNR will be really meaningful child participation. And I think I have to also highlight that the government is as a duty bearers, because there is some confusion. We is actually who is actually the actor for VNR. I have to say, government is the actor. I mean, government needs the CSO to consult their achievement, but it is actually the government duty to write the VNR, in my perspective, actually. So I think this is important to highlight this government as a duty bearer for VNR, because it is the task of the government to arrange the achievement of the SDGs target. Next. So I think I already explained the child participation. So I think I can go back to Maria. Back to you, Maria, because I think I already explained this. The child participation.
Thank you so much, Junito Gias, for explaining to us how it really works in Indonesia in the context of your organization engaging the VNR and outlining some of the challenges and how you address these challenges. So thank you so much for that substantive input. Our second speaker is a young advocate who is also here to join us and share his reflections. Prathit Singh is a 19-year-old advocate for rights of children. Oh, he's from India. He has been involved with COVID under 19, hashtag COVID under 19, as a peer mentor and a youth advisor, and has been advocating for intergenerational partnership between children and adults and community awareness for rights of children. He is also a researcher, an international relations enthusiast, and a student of political science at University of Delhi.
Namaste to everyone. I'm Prathit, and I'm a child rights activist from India. And it really thrills my heart to see involvement of civil society organizations in pushing children's and young people's participation in the whole process of HLPF. And I'm here to talk about my experience at the HLPF 2021 on behalf of COVID under 19. COVID under 19 initiative is essentially a collective of children, young people, national and international civil society organizations and academics working together to uphold children's rights in pandemic recovery and response through participatory advocacy and keeping children at the helm of advocacy and research. So my participation, before I come on to my participation at the HLPF, I would briefly like to talk about the whole issue in general about involvement of children in the processes of VNR. When I joined the initiative, the COVID under 19 initiative, I was 17 years old, a child who did not know about forums like the HLPF, who did not know that accountability mechanisms so strong as the HLPF exists. And I was unaware of the fact that platforms as, where platforms as HLPF exists, where leaders can express and held accountable for what they've been doing for children and upholding my rights and rights of children around the world. It was when I joined the COVID under 19 initiative, and I was through the 2 years, I'm now 19 years old and I'm still continuing with the initiative, that now I'm aware that accountability mechanisms like the HLPF exist, and accountability mechanisms like the Voluntary National reports can be taken into account to make sure that leaders stand up to their responsibility of upholding the rights of children. And now I see the power of civil society organizations, since COVID under 19 is a collective of civil societies throughout the world. The power of civil society organizations is firstly to make children and young people aware about about platforms like the HLPF, which are meant for leaders to be held accountable in SDGs, and leaders to talk about what they've been doing for rights of children around the world. So I believe the first step, which is important, is in terms of awareness of children on mechanisms and platforms of involvement like the Sustainable Development Goals High-Level Political Forum. And so that, I believe, is the first step when we look at it, because involvement of children in the High-Level Political Forum is very important and very crucial, because we remember that the Sustainable Development Goals cannot be realized without the participation of young people and children. And so a platform which is dedicated to the Sustainable Development Goals cannot be complete without the participation of children and young people. And so it is important to involve them in the process, and not just of the VNRs, but also have their voices heard about what they think about the whole process of HLPF, what they know about the whole process of the SDGs. And so the first primal step that goes in this is to hear their voices, make sure that their voices are heard. At COVID-19, during the HLPF, we had several moments where children and young people had an opportunity to express what they think about the leaders, what they've been talking about. We had our own side event on the sidelines of the HLPF with the participation of Dr. Najat Mallam-Rashid as a form of an intergenerational dialogue where children and young people express what they think about the SDGs and talk about what they've been feeling about the leaders' statements, and where leaders like Dr. Najat Mallam-Rashid respond to what children have been thinking. So this is the form of intergenerational partnerships that we need today in the processes like HLPF, to make sure that when leaders stand up to accountability, this accountability is also to the right holders around the world, which is children. So that is why it is very crucial for involving children in the whole process of HLPF. And we also had a statement of our own from the COVID-19 representing voices of children globally, of our hopes, our aspiration for the next year of HLPF, and also our disappointments for the current year of HLPF. So we also had a platform to articulate the voices of thousands of children and young people around the world, what they think, what they feel about the whole process of leaders coming up and holding themselves accountable before the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so that becomes a point to note, that children at least need a platform to articulate their voices when it comes to processes like HLPF. And it is very important for civil societies and for governments to give them platforms as these. Now, as Dr. Najat Mallam-Rashid said today, that voluntary national reports are a medium through which we can include children in the process of HLPF, and a pillar through which we can ensure that children's participation is ensured in the whole process of the high-level political forum. I feel that there is more to it. I feel that resonating with her statements, I feel that children, this inclusivity must ensure that it breaks the barriers of language, it breaks the barriers of disproportionality, which was shown at its worst during the pandemic, and it makes sure that all the voices from around the countries, from around the world, are included even when it comes to voluntary national reports. So it is important to make sure that barriers which are being faced today when it comes to inclusion of children from marginalized communities, children from linguistic groups, these barriers are broken, and the inclusion is meaningful inclusion in terms that children never feel excluded out of the processes like the VNRs, which are framed by national governments, and the processes of HLPF, which happen at the global level. It is important to make sure that this inclusion happens. And the second thing which is important is also to make sure that this whole process is child-friendly, that children do not feel excluded in the process. When we talk about meaningful involvement, we mean that the whole process of involving children happens on an equal level, where children do not feel out of place, where children do not feel that adults are pedestalized before them. And so this child friendliness, which needs to be incorporated in the process, may also even mean that VNRs also have a child-friendly version where children can understand what have been talked about their rights and what is on the platform, on the table of the United Nations when leaders give their reports on SDG accountability. And that is why I believe that accountability is such an important pillar. And so meaningful involvement of children is very important in these terms. Now, coming to my own involvement at the HLPF and my experience and views at the HLPF, since I was also involved with the UN Major Group for Children and Young People, who had their own sideline of young people and children getting together after every day at HLPF, talking about what they've been thinking and talking about what they've been feeling about the statements which are presented, which I believe is another empowering mechanism for children, because everyone, young people and children, needs a platform to express what they feel about the process too, not just through delegations, but also getting along with sidelines, getting along with civil societies to talk about what they've been thinking. And so it is important to make that happen. And when I was involved with the UNMGCY and COVID-19, a sense of empowerment automatically came into me, where I felt that, yes, my voice is being heard at a platform like HLPF. And that I felt needs to be expanded to children worldwide, because every child has a right to be heard when it comes to his or her own rights. And so it is important to expand this at a global level. And my latter experience at the HLPF at the 2021 was also somewhat rather disappointing, because waiting through the days, I had the opportunity to sit, through the death of the night here in India at 1 a.m. in the morning. I was sitting through and waiting with bated breath that the word meaningful is included in the ministerial declaration, that governments around the world finally take this into account, that children's meaningful participation is important. But that did not unfortunately happen. And that actually turned out to be a disappointment for me. And I was very disappointed by the fact, but at the same time, I was more disappointed when I heard governments coming up to the floor of the ministerial discussion and expressing statements like, children do not deserve a place at the table and children do not have an opinion of their own, which was very disappointing for a young person who's been passionately working in child rights. And so I feel that next year's high-level political forum is all the more important. It is more important to show governments around the world and to make sure that children's voices are included. And it is through this process that we make sure that no government or no civil society or a person thinks that children have no voice or they do not deserve a seat at the table. It is important to demonstrate through children's inclusion in the VNR process, through the delegations that are being sent at the HLPF and inclusion of children and young people in them. It is important to show that, yes, children do have a voice when it comes to talking about sustainable development goals and their rights, and to show that children have a voice of their own and deserve a place at the table when we talk about sustainable development goals, which so much talks about the future. And it is with this hope that I rely on the civil society to ensure that young people's and children's participation is ensured at the HLPF next year through voluntary national reports, through participation in delegations, and through platforms which empower children to talk about the process of HLPF. And that, I believe, would go a long way in empowering children and including them in the process of HLPF. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I just want to give a big thanks to Prathit Singh, because I learned a lot. I'm sure many of us learned a lot just listening to your perspective and how important it is really to listen to children and youth activists. Tell us how you feel, what your needs are, and to sit and walk with us in pushing for advocacies for the rights and welfare of young people such as yourself. So thank you so much. There's one last thing that we need to do, and there will be a poll that will be taken. And the poll really is a Zoom question that asks, would you be interested to continue learning more about and get engaged in the VNR process? And you can just quickly, answer yes or no, because this will serve as a gauge about ongoing interests to know more about the VNR and engage in the VNR process.
In terms of the next steps, the results have already come in, and we've had 96% of those who replied have said yes, they're very interested. So I think this is a very good indication that we should continue. We will now look at what are the next steps. I think perhaps the actual mentoring or studying how to, how to develop coalitions, how to get involved in the coalitions, how to find out who is in the government, how to develop the reports, how to link up the different topics that we work on with the SDGs that are going to be examined. And I hope that you will continue to keep in touch with us. Please send us a line if you want to get our regular newsletter about events and what's happening in the region. So I would now like to really thank all of you